Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. Vienna, 1898. The Habsburg Empire had known many rulers, but none quite like Emperor Yosef Lichtenstein. At 42, he stood ramrod straight in his midnight blue uniform, the weight of 12 crowns heavy upon his shoulders. The Habsburg palace's gilded mirrors reflected a man with silver threads weaving through his once dark hair, eyes that had witnessed wars and uprisings, treaties and betrayals. He was the monarch who had modernized the railroads, reformed the judiciary, and expanded the empire's reach to the edges of the Balkans. Yet as he stood on the balcony overlooking the imperial gardens, watching the autumn leaves scatter across manicured lawns, he felt the familiar hollowness that no amount of territorial expansion could fill. "Your Imperial Majesty," Count Brodmann's voice interrupted his solitude. "The delegation from Transylvania awaits your audience." Yosef nodded without turning. "Tell them I shall arrive shortly." When the door closed, he allowed himself 10 more seconds of silence before straightening his medals and preparing to be emperor again. Amelia Farrington had been in Vienna for precisely 3 weeks, 2 days, and approximately 7 hours. Not that she was counting. The English ambassador's daughter had expected to find the Habsburg capital filled with waltzes and gaiety. Instead, she discovered a city of contradictions, magnificent architecture hiding poverty in its shadows, music flowing from palaces while whispers of unrest echoed in taverns. "You must stop wandering off alone," her father reprimanded as their carriage rolled through the Ringstrasse. "Vienna isn't London, my dear. The imperial court has protocols, expectations." Amelia adjusted her hat, a modest creation compared to the elaborate plumage worn by Viennese noblewomen. "I was only visiting the Natural History Museum, father. Hardly a diplomatic incident." Ambassador William Farrington sighed. "Tonight's imperial reception is crucial for Anglo-Austrian relations. The emperor himself will be present, and I shall curtsy appropriately and say nothing controversial about the Hungarian question," she promised, though her mind was already drifting to the book on geology hidden in her quarters. At 26, Amelia was considered dangerously close to spinsterhood. 2 failed engagements in London had earned her a reputation for being difficult, a description she privately wore with pride. Vienna was to be her fresh start, her father had explained. What he meant was her last chance to make a suitable match before resigning herself to the role of an ambassador's companion for the remainder of her days. The Hofburg's ceremonial hall blazed with 1,000 candles. Diplomats from across Europe mingled with the Austro-Hungarian aristocracy, a sea of uniforms, gowns, and carefully calibrated smiles. Emperor Yosef moved through the gathering with practiced ease, exchanging precisely the right number of words with each dignitary, his expression revealing nothing of the migraine building behind his temples. "The British ambassador, Your Imperial Majesty," announced the chamberlain. "William Farrington and his daughter, Miss Amelia Farrington." Yosef nodded as the middle-aged diplomat bowed. Then his gaze fell upon the young woman beside him. Unlike the other ladies present, she wore a gown of understated elegance, deep blue silk that complemented her chestnut hair. But it was her eyes that arrested him, intelligent, curious, and lacking the fawning deference he had grown accustomed to seeing. "Your Imperial Majesty," she said, executing a flawless curtsy. "Miss Farrington," he replied, surprised by the sudden urge to prolong the conversation. "I trust Vienna has been welcoming." "The city is magnificent, Your Majesty, though I confess I find the palace's geological collection even more fascinating. The Carpathian quartz specimens are particularly remarkable." A diplomatic silence fell. The British ambassador looked mortified. "You visited the imperial collection?" Yosef asked, ignoring the line of waiting dignitaries. "Twice, Your Majesty, though I fear the curator grew suspicious when I requested to examine the specimens without gloves." For the first time that evening, perhaps that month, Yosef felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. The curator is overly protective. The minerals survived millions of years without his intervention. Her eyes widened slightly, and in that moment, something imperceptible shifted in the crowded, stuffy hall. "Perhaps," Yosef continued, aware of the growing impatience behind him, "you would appreciate a private viewing of the newer acquisitions from the Bosnia expedition. They haven't been catalogued for public display yet." "I would be honored, Your Majesty." she replied, her voice betraying genuine enthusiasm rather than mere courtly deference. As protocol demanded, he moved on to the Russian delegation, but found his thoughts returning to the unusual English woman who cared more for rocks than for imperial attention. The following Wednesday, Amelia found herself in the Imperial Museum's restricted section, surrounded by glass cases of mineral specimens labeled in elegant German script. Her father had nearly fainted when the imperial invitation arrived, then spent 3 hours coaching her on appropriate topics of conversation with a monarch. His Imperial Majesty regrets he is delayed by urgent matters of state, announced a stern-faced chamberlain. He suggests you begin your examination, and he will join when circumstances permit. Amelia nodded, secretly relieved. The emperor's absence would allow her to focus on the extraordinary collection without the pressure of royal small talk. She lost herself in the specimens, notebook in hand, sketching crystalline structures and jotting observations. You take more detailed notes than my geologists. She startled, nearly dropping her pencil. Emperor Yosef stood in the doorway, wearing a simpler uniform than at the reception, though no less regal. Forgive me, Your Majesty. I didn't hear you enter. She moved to curtsy, but he waved it away. Please continue. What have you found interesting thus far? For the next hour, they moved from case to case, discussing mineral formations and geological anomalies. Yosef revealed an unexpected knowledge of the subject, explaining how certain specimens had been discovered during military campaigns in the empire's eastern territories. You speak as if you were there yourself, Amelia observed. A shadow crossed his face. I was. Before inheriting the throne, I commanded the Eastern Army. Those mountains held more than strategic value for me. You collected specimens while conducting military operations? To the eternal frustration of my officers, he admitted, a rare smile briefly illuminating his features. They couldn't understand why their commander insisted on carrying rocks alongside tactical maps. As afternoon light streamed through the high windows, casting prismatic reflections from the crystal specimens, Amelia realized she was speaking to the emperor as if he were a fellow enthusiast at the Royal Geological Society. More surprisingly, he seemed to prefer it. When they reached the final display, Yosef hesitated. Miss Farrington, would you care to see something not in the collection? Without waiting for her response, he removed a small key from his pocket and unlocked a drawer beneath the display cabinet. From within, he withdrew a velvet pouch. Found this myself, in a remote valley near the Romanian border, he said, carefully emptying the contents into his palm. I've never shown it to anyone else. In his hand lay a perfectly formed quartz crystal with a phantom, a ghost-like smaller crystal visible within the larger one. It's extraordinary, Amelia whispered, leaning closer. May I? He placed it in her gloved palm. Some believe these phantom crystals represent memories trapped in time, one moment encased within another. Their eyes met over the crystal, and for a heartbeat, the weight of crowns and protocols seemed to lift from his shoulders. The moment shattered as the chamberlain appeared at the door. Your Imperial Majesty, the Hungarian Prime Minister has arrived for your audience. Yosef's expression closed like a shutter. He carefully returned the crystal to its pouch and handed it to Amelia. A gift, Miss Farrington. Perhaps it will remind you that even emperors occasionally escape their cages. Before she could respond, he was gone, once again bearing the invisible mantle that separated him from ordinary mortals. He gave you a gift? Lady Margaret Stevenson, wife of the British military attaché, nearly spilled her tea. The emperor never gives personal gifts to anyone outside the family or for diplomatic occasions. Amelia regretted mentioning the crystal, which now sat on her bedside table. The weekly gathering of diplomatic wives and daughters at the British embassy had turned suddenly focused on her. It was merely a geological specimen, she demurred. His Majesty is knowledgeable about minerals. Is he indeed? Lady Stevenson arched an eyebrow. How fascinating that in 15 years at court, none of us discovered this imperial passion. Countess Eleonora Bathiany, the only Hungarian noblewoman present, studied Amelia with newfound interest. You should be careful, Miss Farrington. The emperor's attention brings scrutiny. There are those who would use any connection to him for political advantage. There is no connection, Amelia insisted. We merely share a scientific interest. But as the weeks passed, this statement became increasingly difficult to maintain. Twice more, Imperial invitations arrived, once to view a new astronomical exhibition, once to attend a lecture on alpine geography. Each time, the emperor appeared, dismissing his entourage to engage in surprisingly easy conversation. During the third such meeting, as they stood before a massive map of the empire in the palace library, Amelia gathered her courage. "May I ask your majesty a personal question?" Yosef looked surprised but nodded. "Why do you continue these educational excursions? Surely you have more pressing imperial matters than discussing rock formations with an ambassador's daughter." His fingers traced the border between Austria and Hungary on the map. "Do you know what it means to rule an empire, Miss Farrington?" "I couldn't possibly. It means never speaking to another human being without calculation. Every word I utter becomes policy. Every gesture is interpreted for hidden meaning." He turned to face her. "But when we discuss the age of a metamorphic rock or the trajectory of a comet, I am, briefly, just a man with an interest. You speak to me as Yosef, not as emperor." "I've been terribly presumptuous," she realized aloud. "You've been genuine," he corrected. "Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Before she could respond, he straightened, imperial mask sliding back into place. "I've kept you too long. But I would be pleased if you would attend the palace concert on Friday. Brahms will be performed." It wasn't until she was in her carriage that Amelia recognized the invitation for what it was, not a diplomatic courtesy, but a personal request. The palace gardens in early winter held a stark beauty, frost outlining bare branches against the gray Viennese sky. Amelia pulled her cloak tighter, grateful for the momentary solitude. The Brahms concert had been magnificent, but the subsequent reception had proven uncomfortable. Court ladies had watched her with poorly disguised curiosity, while several ministers had suddenly found reasons to engage Ambassador Farrington in lengthy conversations that inevitably circled to his daughter's unusual access to the emperor. "You're not dressed warmly enough for December in Vienna." She turned to find Emperor Yosef approaching along the gravel path, a palace guard discreetly remaining at a distance. "Your Majesty," she curtsied. "I needed a moment of fresh air." "As did I." He gestured to a stone bench partially sheltered by a yew hedge. "My chancellor spoke for 40 minutes about tariff regulations. I began to envy the garden's statues their peaceful existence." As they sat, Amelia noted the dark circles beneath his eyes. "You seem tired, Your Majesty." "Yosef," he said quietly, "when we are not observed by the entire court, I would ask you to call me Yosef." The intimacy of the request, its break with every protocol, hung in the cold air between them. "I couldn't possibly." "No, I suppose not." He looked out across the winter garden. "Propriety must be maintained, especially when—" He stopped himself. "When what?" "When I find myself watching the door before every function, hoping you might attend." He spoke matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather, but his hands, those hands that signed imperial decrees and controlled the fate of millions, trembled slightly. Amelia felt her heart quicken. "Your Maj, Yosef, this cannot be. I am acutely aware." A bitter smile crossed his face. "I who must consider dynastic implications with every breath, who rejected a love match in my youth to marry a suitable Habsburg princess, who buried that princess 7 years ago having never earned more than her dutiful respect." A gust of wind scattered brown leaves across the path. "You will return to England eventually," he continued. "And I will remain here, bound to this empire until death. But in these moments," he reached for her hand, then stopped himself. "Forgive me. I have spoken inappropriately." He rose to leave, every inch the emperor again, but Amelia found herself reaching for his sleeve. "I've been invited to stay through spring," she said softly. "My father believes I might improve my German with extended exposure." Something kindled in his eyes. "The Imperial Library contains excellent German texts on geology. Perhaps you would permit me to recommend some volumes." "I would be most grateful, Yosef," she whispered, the name feeling both forbidden and right on her lips. As they walked back toward the palace, carefully maintaining proper distance, snow began to fall, soft, silent flakes settling on the shoulders of an emperor and the woman who had glimpsed the man beneath the crown. January brought diplomatic crisis. Russian expansionism in the Balkans threatened the empire's southern territories, and palace lights burned late into the night as ministers and generals came and went. Amelia saw Yosef only at official functions, where he performed his imperial role flawlessly, sparing her nothing more than the courtesy due an ambassador's daughter. But there were letters, ostensibly formal correspondence about scientific texts, delivered by trusted servants. Between discussions of geological formations, hidden messages emerged. I watched the stars from my balcony last night and wondered if you might be observing the same constellation. The weight of the crown feels heavier with each passing day, yet thoughts of you lighten my steps. She kept the letters in a locked box beneath her bed, rereading them by candlelight, committing his elegant script to memory before burning the most revealing passages. In February, as tensions with Russia escalated, the imperial court relocated to Schönbrunn Palace. The move created an unexpected opportunity when Amelia discovered the palace's extensive orangery connected to a small library overlooking the gardens. The citrus collection dates to Maria Theresa's time, the elderly gardener explained during her tour. His Majesty often walks here alone in the early mornings. Says the scent of orange blossoms clears his mind for the day's decisions. The following dawn, Amelia slipped from the diplomatic residence, citing an early morning botanical study to the confused footman. When she entered the hushed orangery, golden light was just beginning to filter through the glass ceiling, illuminating rows of potted citrus trees heavy with fruit. She found him at the far end, standing before a particularly ancient orange tree, lost in thought. These trees have witnessed 3 centuries of Habsburg rule, Yosef said without turning. They've seen empires rise and fall, yet still produce fruit each year. Perhaps there's wisdom in that consistency, Amelia replied, her voice echoing slightly in the vast glass space. He turned then, and the naked emotion on his face before he composed himself made her breath catch. You shouldn't be here, he said, even as he closed the distance between them. I know. The Russian ambassador has spies everywhere. Yes. If anyone saw you enter, I told them I was studying botanical specimens. She gestured to the notebook in her hand. Which is true. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Always precise with your facts, Miss Farrington. Always. They stood among the orange trees, close enough to feel each other's warmth, yet not touching, the invisible barrier of position and duty still between them. War is coming, he said quietly. The ministers believe it inevitable. And you? I've seen war. I know its cost. His hand reached up, hesitating just short of touching her cheek. Sometimes I wonder what life might have been if I were born a simple geologist instead of an emperor. You would still be extraordinary, she whispered. The morning light caught dust motes swirling between them, time suspended in golden particles. Amelia, he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. When their fingers finally intertwined, the simple touch felt more intimate than any passionate embrace. They stood thus, connected yet proper, as the morning light strengthened around them. I must go, he said eventually. The ministers wait. Yes. But before he left, he pressed something into her palm, a small key. The library adjacent to the orangery, he explained. Should you wish to continue your botanical studies. I sometimes find myself there after evening councils. As he walked away, imperial posture already returning to his shoulders, Amelia clutched the key, understanding its significance. Not just access to a room, but to stolen moments in a life that could never truly be hers. For 6 weeks, they carved out a secret world in the orangery library. Sometimes they had mere minutes, harried conversations between state functions. Other evenings stretched longer, filled with discussions of books, science, and carefully couched personal revelations. My mother died when I was 8. Amelia told him one evening as rain lashed against the glass ceiling. Father buried himself in diplomatic work. I was raised by governesses and books. Yosef nodded, seated in the chair opposite hers, propriety maintained even in privacy. My father prepared me for the throne from the moment I could walk. 14 hours daily of languages, history, military strategy. Childhood was a luxury the heir couldn't afford. Did you resent him for it? I understood the necessity, he replied, then paused. But yes, sometimes I resented him. And sometimes I feel I'm becoming him, rigid, isolated, seeing people as pieces on a strategic board. You're not, she said firmly. A man who collects rocks from battlefields hasn't lost his humanity. In these conversations, they built a bridge between their worlds. the emperor who couldn't show weakness and the woman who refused to surrender her independence. They spoke of fears and hopes that neither could share with anyone else, political realities tempered with personal truths. They never crossed certain lines. A brush of fingers passing a book, a lingering gaze, standing close enough to feel each other's warmth. These were their only physical indulgences. Both understood the consequences of discovery, the scandal that would damage not just careers but international relations. Yet as March bloomed across Vienna, their carefully maintained boundaries began to strain. The Hungarian separatists grow bolder. Yosef confided one evening, pacing the small library. "My advisors recommend a show of force." "And what do you recommend?" Amelia asked from her seat by the window. "Compromise. Reforms." But the old guard sees only weakness and concession. He stopped pacing, his face momentarily unguarded. "Sometimes I wonder if the empire can survive another generation." "That sounds like treason, Your Majesty," she said, attempting levity. "Perhaps it is." He moved to the window beside her. 20 years ago, I would have deployed troops without hesitation. Now I question whether maintaining imperial borders is worth the blood of young men. What's changed?" His eyes met hers. "I've begun to measure success differently." The admission hung between them, weighted with implication. Outside, moonlight silvered the palace gardens, casting long shadows across manicured lawns. "If I were a different man," he began. "But you're not," she interrupted gently. "You're the emperor. And I'm the daughter of a diplomat who will eventually be posted elsewhere. Is that what you want? To leave Vienna when your father's assignment ends?" The directness of the question startled her. "What I want doesn't matter. Reality doesn't bend to personal desires." "It could." His voice dropped lower. "I could create a permanent diplomatic position for your father. You could remain in Vienna indefinitely." The offer, its implications, its temptations, left her momentarily speechless. "You would use imperial power for such a personal purpose?" she finally asked. Shame flashed across his features. "You're right to question it." "I'm sorry." He moved away from the window. "I've overstepped." "Yosef." She stood, crossing the distance between them. "I didn't say no." When their lips finally met, it felt like the inevitable conclusion to a story written in careful glances and hidden letters. His hands trembled as they framed her face, the touch reverent, restrained even in surrender. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "God help me, I love you." The words, once spoken, could never be reclaimed. They clung to each other in the moonlit library, the empire and its demands temporarily forgotten. The assassination attempt came 3 days later. A Hungarian nationalist fired twice at the imperial carriage during a procession to the cathedral. Yosef escaped with a graze to his shoulder, but the incident plunged Vienna into chaos. Security tightened across the capital. The diplomatic corps was restricted to official functions only. For 2 weeks, Amelia heard nothing from Yosef beyond public bulletins about his recovery. The Orangery Library remained locked, their private sanctuary suddenly inaccessible. "We're being watched," her father warned over breakfast. "The security services are investigating everyone with access to the imperial household. Several diplomats have been questioned about their movements. Surely they don't suspect the British delegation?" Amelia kept her voice carefully steady. "They suspect everyone." Ambassador Farrington looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. "There are rumors about you, Amelia." Her teacup froze halfway to her lips. "What rumors?" "That you've been seen in the palace at unusual hours. That the emperor has shown you particular attention." He sighed heavily. "I've dismissed these as jealous court gossip, but I need to know. Is there anything that might compromise our position here?" She thought of letters hidden beneath her bed, of moonlit kisses in a secret library, of words that could never be unsaid. "No, father," she lied. "Nothing." That night, a palace guard appeared at the embassy with a small package marked "Scientific Materials Requested by Miss Farrington." Inside, she found a mineral specimen wrapped in paper, and beneath it, a note in familiar handwriting. Asterisk, "The Falcon watches the east garden wall at midnight. Bring only yourself and trust." Asterisk. The night air held the first promise of spring as Amelia slipped through the embassy gardens. She wore her darkest dress, hair concealed beneath a servant's cap borrowed from the laundry. The east wall of the palace gardens loomed ahead, its ornate iron gate patrolled by imperial guards. She hesitated in the shadows, questioning her sanity. Then she saw it, a falcon perched on the wall, its silhouette unmistakable against the moonlit stone. Not a wild bird, she realized, but a trained hunting falcon wearing jesses. As she approached, the bird launched from its perch, circling once before flying to a small postern gate hidden by ivy. There, a cloaked figure waited, face obscured. Quickly, a woman's voice whispered as the gate swung open. "Follow me and stay silent." Amelia found herself led through servant passages and narrow corridors, ascending stairs that servants might use to move invisibly through the palace. Her guide never spoke again, moving with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the palace's secrets. Finally, they reached a small door. The woman turned, lowering her hood to reveal an elegant face with the unmistakable Habsburg jaw. "Countess Sophia Lichtenstein," she introduced herself. "The Emperor's sister." Amelia curtsied automatically. "Your Highness." "Save your explanations," the Countess interrupted. "My brother is behind this door. You have 1 hour before I return to escort you out. The guards have been redirected, but time is still precious." Her stern expression softened slightly. "He has never asked such a favor of me before. In 30 years, this is the first time he has requested my help for something entirely personal." Before Amelia could respond, the Countess disappeared down the corridor, leaving her alone before the unmarked door. Inside, she found not the formal state apartment she had imagined, but a surprisingly modest study. Books lined the walls, geological specimens sat on every surface, and maps were spread across a large desk. This was Yosef's personal retreat, she realized, the one place in the palace that reflected the man rather than the monarch. He stood by the fireplace, his arm in a silk sling, face drawn with exhaustion but eyes brightening at her entrance. "You came," he said simply. "Of course I came." She closed the distance between them, carefully embracing him to avoid his injured shoulder. "I feared, I know." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "The security services have intercepted all my personal correspondence. Every movement is monitored. It took my sister's intervention to create even this brief moment." "Your sister knows about us?" A wry smile touched his lips. "Sophia has always seen through imperial facades. She guessed my feelings months ago." They moved to a small sofa before the fire, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched, savoring the simple proximity denied them these past weeks. "The Hungarian situation worsens," he said quietly. "The council wants military intervention. They're using the assassination attempt to justify a crackdown on separatist regions. And you? I'm proposing a different path. Greater autonomy for Hungarian territories, constitutional reforms." He took her hand, tracing patterns on her palm. "Your influence, perhaps. You've taught me to question whether power must always be maintained through force. You would risk your throne for these reforms. I would risk it for a better empire." His fingers intertwined with hers. "But I cannot risk you. The security services are building a case that foreign interests were involved in the assassination attempt. The British embassy will soon come under greater scrutiny." The implication hung in the air between them. "You're sending me away?" she whispered. "I'm protecting you," he corrected gently. "Your father will receive orders recalling him to London tomorrow. A prestigious promotion, Undersecretary for European Affairs. A promotion you arranged." "Yes." He didn't deny it. "You'll be safely beyond the empire's borders before the investigations intensify. And us? What becomes of us?" The question emerged smaller than she intended, vulnerability laying her bare. Yosef reached inside his jacket, removing a small box. "I have no right to ask anything of you. The future I can offer holds only constraints and secrecy." He opened the box, revealing not a ring as she had momentarily feared, but a pendant, a perfectly formed quartz crystal with a phantom inside, now set in platinum and hanging from a fine chain. "My memories captured within memories," he explained, voice rough with emotion. "Take this to England. Live the life you deserve, free, intellectual, unbound by imperial protocols. And know that somewhere, ruling an empire he can never escape, is a man whose heart you've claimed more completely than any territory." Tears blurred her vision as he fastened the necklace around her throat. "I can't just forget you," she whispered. "I don't ask that. I ask only that you live fully, brilliantly, as the extraordinary woman you are." His hand cradled her cheek. Perhaps someday, when political tensions ease, don't make promises neither of us can keep, she interrupted gently. Not tonight. They spent their remaining time speaking of smaller things, favorite books, childhood memories, scientific theories, building a storehouse of moments to sustain them through the separation ahead. When the clock chimed the hour, they both fell silent, the inevitability of parting settling heavy between them. I have something for you as well, Amelia said finally, reaching into her pocket. She withdrew a small, polished stone, ordinary river quartz, unremarkable except for the perfect fossil of a fern embedded within. I found it along the Danube last month. Life preserved in stone. Even after everything else crumbles, this moment remains. His fingers closed around the stone, throat working with emotion. Amelia. A soft knock interrupted them. Countess Sophia had returned. Their goodbye was brief, a last embrace, a lingering kiss, whispered words too private for history to record. Then Amelia was following the Countess back through silent corridors, the phantom crystal cold against her skin, a physical reminder of what could never be more than a phantom love. London, September 1899. Autumn rain lashed against the windows of the Royal Geological Society as Amelia concluded her presentation on crystalline formations in the Carpathian Mountains. The assembled scientists, all men, with the exception of herself, applauded with genuine enthusiasm. Extraordinary findings, Miss Farrington. Professor Holloway commented as attendees gathered their notes. Your year in Vienna certainly proved productive. The Habsburg imperial collections are unparalleled, she replied, unconsciously touching the crystal pendant that never left her throat. I was fortunate to have access. As the hall emptied, Amelia gathered her presentation materials, satisfied with her academic success, but feeling the familiar hollowness that had accompanied her since leaving Vienna 6 months earlier. Excuse me, Miss Farrington? A young man approached, clutching a leather portfolio. I'm Thomas Reed, from the Foreign Office. Might I have a word? She followed him to a quiet corner, curious but wary. I've been instructed to deliver this personally, he said, removing an envelope bearing the Habsburg imperial seal. It arrived via diplomatic pouch, with specific instructions that it reach you directly. Her heart stuttered as she accepted the envelope. Thank you, Mr. Reed. There's more, miss. He hesitated. I'm to inform you that an imperial scientific delegation will arrive in London next month. His Imperial Majesty apparently takes a personal interest in geological research and will be attending the International Scientific Congress. Amelia's fingers tightened around the envelope. The Emperor himself is coming to London? Yes, miss. First Habsburg monarch to visit England in 30 years, I believe. Reed looked slightly bewildered, caused quite a stir at the Foreign Office. Apparently, he specifically requested a presentation on crystalline formations in the Carpathians. When she was finally alone, Amelia opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of imperial stationery, bearing only a few lines in familiar handwriting. Asterisk, the Hungarian Compromise has been signed. Autonomy granted. The empire changes shape but continues. Perhaps people can do the same. Asterisk, asterisk, the phantom remains a shadow no longer. 1 month until scientific revelations may resume. Asterisk. Why beneath his initial was a postscript that brought tears to her eyes. Asterisk, some emperors discover that while they may rule nations, their hearts answer to a different sovereign entirely. Mine awaits your command in London. Asterisk, Amelia pressed the letter to her chest, the phantom crystal warm against her skin, no longer a memory preserved in stone, but a promise of a future neither had dared imagine.